Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. Friends, today I'm going to try to tackle a serious problem in Jewish life. The problem is the mishandling and mislabeling of kosher meat, primarily the type that is known as Glatt kosher. The reason this video is so important is because we, as a community, have been lied to and exploited for either financial or fanatical reasons, and my goal with this video is to inform religious Jews of the truth. So, to start off, what is Glatt kosher? We're told in the Torah, do not eat meat from an animal torn in the field. The word torn here is the word treifa, the Hebrew word treifa. I'm sure you've heard treifa or treif many times. You probably heard that something like McDonald's hamburgers are treif or Arby's is treif, right? Now, in both of these instances, the word treif is incorrectly used. The word treif or treifa is defined by Chazal to mean any wound or ailment that takes the life of its host within a 6-month period. In other words, a terminally ill being. So, an animal that has a wound that will cause it to eventually die within 6 months is considered forbidden for Jewish consumption. So meat found in a non-kosher restaurant would most likely be considered a nevela, an animal that has been improperly slaughtered, unless of course it was treif meat that was sold to them by a kosher slaughterhouse. But regardless, a treifa and nevela are forbidden for Jewish consumption according to halacha, Jewish law. So where does glatt come into play? Well, like we said, Jews are forbidden to eat treifa meat, which includes penetrating wounds on the inside as well as the outside of the animal. So after a steer is slaughtered, its organs are carefully inspected for punctures or adhesions by God-fearing Jews. Actually, the area of the steer that's most likely to contain these punctures or adhesions are the lungs, and that's where the term glatt really comes into play. Glatt comes from the Yiddish word for smooth, halak in Hebrew, meaning that in this case, the lungs were free from any punctures or adhesions. Now, the reason that adhesions or sirchas are a problem is because these typically form after a wounding has occurred, almost like a scab, that if they were to fall off, the animal would become terminally ill and thus be a treifa and forbidden for Jewish consumption. Actually, according to the vast majority of poskim, in Jewish history, this was not an issue because they taught that if a sercha could be removed without damaging the lung, the animal could still be considered kosher or even glatt. Because the idea of glatt, brought down by the RAMAH at least, is not that the lung has to have no adhesions at all to be glatt, but rather that if it has adhesions or sirchas, later called ririn, and they can be removed without damaging the lung, the animal could still be considered glatt. Nowadays, this rule is really only accepted by non-Sephardi Jews, because according to the BEIS YOSEF, who modern-day Sephardim follow, you could only eat beef that is glatt, without any adhesions. This is known as glatt BEIS YOSEF or halak BEIS YOSEF. Now, Ashkenazim also hold by the BEIS YOSEF, but mainly through the RAMAH's commentary of it, who said that Ashkenazim don't have to consume BEIS YOSEF glatt. It states that if there was a God-fearing man doing the peeling of the sirchas or the adhesions on the lung, there is absolutely no problem with consuming the meat, and the meat could still be known as glatt. So, let's recap. How many forms of glatt are there? Well, my friends, there are currently 2 forms of glatt meat. Regular glatt, which makes up around 98% of all glatt meat on the market. And then there is glatt BEIS YOSEF, also known as halak BEIS YOSEF. Now, you're probably wondering, how can there be 2 forms of glatt? Right? It's either glatt or it's not glatt. Again, glatt means smooth in Yiddish. Friends, regular glatt is fully glatt after the adhesions or ririn have been removed, while BEIS YOSEF glatt is glatt without containing any adhesions from the beginning. So, in other words, it was always smooth. Now, this really isn't a more firm or less firm issue. It's more of a common sense one, being that only a minuscule amount of steer are what is considered halak beis Yosef or Glatt beis Yosef. And that's really how the Rambam explains it. He says that this practice, speaking about beis Yosef or halak beis Yosef Glatt, causes great loss and the forfeit of Jewish money. This was never the custom in France or in Spain, and it was never heard of in the West. It is not proper to follow this custom. Instead, all that is necessary is to check the long, and if it has no holes, the animal is permitted. And for all those Sephardim out there, the Rambam is also Sephardi, and his psak predated that of the beis Yosef, just for the purists who want to know. Now, I know many of you are asking yourself, well, this doesn't really make sense. If the halacha is that we're not supposed to eat beef from any animal whose lungs weren't smooth, and again, we just learned that regular Ashkenazi glatt is glatt after the fact, where does regular non-glatt meat come into play? My friends, here is the real eye-opener. There is no such thing as non-glatt beef that is halachically kosher. Thus, all kosher beef is glatt, including and especially Hebrew National. That's right. In our modern day, we call such a thing a scam. Have you ever wondered why organizations like the OU 30 years ago put hechshers on meat that was only marked kosher, but nowadays only endorse supposedly glatt kosher brands? That's right. It's a scam. And all this started after World War II, when many Jewish Europeans flooded the Jewish neighborhoods in America and thus began the kosher mafias. This is why big gadolim like Rabbi Moshe Feinstein would not eat meat that was labeled glatt, because he did not condone the scam. What's even funnier is that the kosher mafia, seeing how the Jewish people bought the first scam, have begun another, putting glatt on packaged chickens and turkeys, when this halacha only really pertains to cattle. And the Jewish people have also bought this scam again. Now, knowing that both non-glatt and glatt meat are technically both glatt, why would anyone charge more for it? Well, if you ask your local butcher, he'll tell you that glatt nowadays just means extra supervision. Okay, fine. So why don't they just tell us that? Why do they have to scare us by lying on the packaging? Look, I and many others would argue that Hebrew National deli meats, at least, far exceeds any other Hamish brands, especially since Rabbi RAMAH took over the label. Think about it. Who would you trust more? A large operation like Hebrew National that employs thousands, that clearly has more to lose than those other smaller operations that are typically hurting financially, right, that are more likely to overlook a mistake, mainly because of their budget? Think about it. Hebrew National was voted one of America's best tasting deli meats. They're clearly under the microscope. Well, friends, another reason why this video is so important is because we have a mitzvah to eat meat on Yom Tovim, which also includes Shabbos. So there are many people who don't live in places where you could get so-called glatt meat, and their only option is Hebrew National. But our responsible rabbis of today tell them that it's better to forego the mitzvah and not eat meat at all because of the kosher mafia. So what we erroneously call non-glatt is glatt, so don't let anyone tell you different. And we, as religious Torah Jews, should not take it for granted that we have such a company like Hebrew National that has made it possible even for poor, mislocated Jews to have available and affordable 100% kosher meat for their consumption. So let's support it. Thank you.